everyone. Welcome to a new episode of 6-1 Forward. I'm Betsy Goldstein, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Liz Brown, President and CEO of the YWCA. Thank you, Liz, for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Betsy.
This is a timely conversation. I had the opportunity to see you on a panel last week around housing and a conversation around homelessness. And I went home later that day, and I know that you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, and there were some comments made in the news about homelessness, which I want to talk about later. But I think that now is a really good time to talk about homelessness as sort of a byproduct of what is going on with housing. And so I'm excited to hear your thoughts on what the YWCA is doing to help in our community and with those that desperately need it. You have some really great stories to share.
Thank you, Betsy.
So as we talk about what is going on with homelessness in Central Ohio, I'd love to hear what has happened in the past with what the YWCA has done to support. But before we do that, Liz Brown, as the CEO and president of the YW, you have been here for a while, but could you share a little bit about your path to getting here?
Yes, it's a winding path. So I've been at the organization coming up on 3 years. It'll be 3 years in January. And before that, I spent 7 years serving the city on Columbus City Council. I think all of our careers take all kinds of paths to get where we are, but I will just talk about my time on council. I really am a big believer in the power of government to do good, right? To do good by people, to represent truly the public interest. And I think without a government that works for good, private interests have too much influence, right?
Absolutely.
So that's why I got into public service. And my time on Columbus City Council, I particularly fell in love with local issues, right? The power of local organizing, local voices solving local problems. And in particular on council, I was really engaged in women's issues, in social justice and racial justice issues, and was able to accomplish a lot in that space. When my predecessor announced that she was leaving YWCA Columbus as CEO, it really sparked my imagination in how I could accomplish things for this community as a practitioner of the work,
Absolutely.
Right? Not as a policymaker in the work. And that's ultimately why I left council in order to come here. YWCA's mission is eliminating racism and empowering women. So right there, it's an amazing thing to wake up and get to do every day. But then our actual footprint in the community is childcare work, housing work, and social justice. And so I am able to, where I did see things on a policy making level before, now see things on a really frontline level and help to translate the needs of that frontline work, the direct client work, translate that into what kinds of policies need to shift, how we can organize better on the ground, how we can represent those stories better from the ground, right? So that we can, as a community, hopefully improve opportunity for the long term.
Can you talk a little bit about the YWCA overall, but also those three pillars you just talked about? Childcare, housing, social justice. What does that look like within the YW? How are those needs met, and what does that advocacy look like?
Yeah, so our organization, YWs across the world, because we are global,
Sure.
are unique in that when we were founded in the UK, I think in around 1850, there were, if you permit me to go down.
Please.
Because this is too good. It's too good. There were two women in about 1850 who disagreed on how you serve community. So one woman said, we serve communities by doing charity work, right? By meeting people where they are right now and doing the charity that will improve their circumstance. And her friend said, no, that's not the way that we serve people. We serve people by changing the policy environment that put them and their children in this circumstance. So these two women couldn't agree on what kind of organization they wanted to start. So they started one that did both. And that's what sets us apart as an organization. So fast forward all these years to today, what that looks like in YWCA Columbus is that we have frontline service work. We operate childcare centers, that's early childhood and school-aged. We serve 1,200 kids every single day in our childcare work. We operate housing and shelter in our housing pillar. So that means we have 91 women who live right here in this building we're speaking in.
Wow.
And they have been in their past homeless, and they have a certified disability. So they need support to sort of regain stability.
Sure.
Also in our housing work, we have an emergency shelter for families experiencing homelessness. So those are our frontline pillars. And then our third pillar is social justice. And that is where we try to change the circumstances of people's lives so that we have a community that's built on opportunity equally for everyone, that's built on equity. And so that hopefully we kind of put ourselves out of business, right?
Sure.
Ultimately in the service work. In our social justice, we focus on our mission of eliminating racism and empowering women. We do that through leadership development. We do that through advocacy. So like tonight, our advocacy team is testifying at City Hall in favor of a new rental registry. And then we also do it through racial equity training. So we have 2 trainers that do work across the community. We've trained thousands of people in the Columbus community to date on racial equity and restorative practices for a better future.
Michael Corey was on maybe a couple months ago now and talked about the changes that have happened in nonprofit land. I'm curious, what has changed for the YWCA? Maybe it's funding, maybe it's a different set of circumstances. I'm not exactly clear on what that might be. Can you share a little bit about what has happened here and what you've experienced, the YW has experienced in the last, let's say, 12 months?
Do you have 3 hours?
Yes.
Let's start. I'm kidding. 2025 has been such a hard year. I'm so glad that you talked to Michael, because he really sets that stage for what nonprofits have been experiencing. And I know your listeners have that foundational knowledge. So I'll sort of cut to how
Sure.
YW was impacted. So in our work, we rely on the federal government for some of what we do. But we rely on local government and state government too. So one advantage we've had is that we don't have an over-reliance on one single source of funding, and it helps to preserve the health of the organization. So we are always vigilant, but trying never to panic, right? Like that's the motto: vigilance, not panic. There have been grants that have been disappeared from the federal government website that we're supposed to pull them down from. And those are a series of paper cuts to the organization that we have to then weather, right? So 2025 is hard for that reason. But honestly, the hardest impact of 2025 for us is that we're a social justice organization. And the way that the Trump administration, the way that the federal government right now is trying to characterize and position those who care about justice has created a chilling effect, even in our very progressive community of Columbus. Right. And so we still stand in the space we've always been, and we use our voices very loudly for the sake of racial equity and social justice, and we don't retreat. But it looks and feels very different in the community to be doing that now. But we're here for the long haul. And we believe that if we continue to be here to educate the community and to proactively use our voice about social justice issues and the importance of racial equity and the policies that help create a more equitable community, that our community will be there for it for the long term.
I think it's a really interesting point to make. From my perspective, I think for 2025, I expected there to be louder voices, but I hear what you're saying, and I believe most of us have seen where there's almost been a retreat of voices. Does the YW feel that as they are out there sort of being the advocate and really pushing that messaging, where maybe they're not seeing the echo of support or the echo of voices that maybe they had in the past?
Yeah, to some degree, yes. And really what I think we see is fear in folks for what it means to speak out.
That's right.
That there is a very sort of retribution-based culture right now. And even, again, with the executive orders which are different from a law.
Correct.
Let's be clear.
Correct.
And we are very clear on that difference. They still create a lot of fear. And a lot of threats for retribution. if you step out of line, right? And so that is what we see more than people's hearts changing. It's not that 12 months later, so many people's brains have been completely rewritten. It's a lot of fear.
Absolutely. And we're seeing that even this week with people who have spoken out about different things, losing jobs or being, brought to the attention or the forefront for what they're saying and speaking out. So I think that's something that we're going to see more and more of, which only makes some of this more challenging.
That's exactly right.
So as we talk about homelessness, I'd love to hear, you had shared on Friday some really interesting statistics and almost walking us through the story of how the YWCA is making an impact in housing, but also what that looks like for the people within our community that might be susceptible to being housing, insecure and finding themselves in those situations.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So, YWCA opened the community's first shelter to serve families experiencing homelessness 20 years ago. So it's our 20th anniversary in October of 2025. Thank you. I think the story of sort of how families experience homelessness can be told in that 20-year history. So if you look back to 2005 when we opened, on average, a family stayed in our shelter about 18 days. And you fast forward to 2014, so about 10 years ago, and it was an average of 24 days that it took families to move through shelter. So to crystallize that for your listeners, it's, a family's in crisis, they lose their home, they come to the shelter, and our team works with families to stabilize what went wrong, right? Is there an eviction that we need to work to get expunged? Is there a utility bill that needs to be paid in arrears? There's lots of things we troubleshoot. And then we do sort of the matchmaking with that family into a new unit, right? So 2005, about 18 days. 2014 had gotten a little longer, about 24 days. Today in 2025, on average, families are staying in shelter for 105 days.
Liz, can you share what is it like to live in a shelter for a single day, for a week? What is that like for a family?
Well, I like to say that our team is really not operating the same place that we intended to open, right? It has become so different to have to be in shelter for 105 days versus 18. And it is not because our team doesn't know how to do their jobs anymore, right? It is because there is not enough housing for a family to then be able to secure that lease and have a successful exit. So you ask what the experience is like. There is a lot of troubleshooting and there's some creativity. We have great collaborations with partnerships with other organizations to help stabilize families. And that happens. And there's on-site childcare. So we operate a 5-star early childhood education center right there at the Family Center. Thank you. We're so proud of it. There's no wait list. So when you come and you're in crisis, there is a place for your child to be safe, whether that's before they're school-aged or after school once they are school-aged. So all of that support is there, right? But then what it feels like ultimately when you're there for 105 days is so much frustration.
Sure.
Right? Because you think to yourself, okay, I can get through this rough patch for a little bit. And then, you find a potential lease, and then it gets an inspection and they find out, there's black mold. Okay, so that house I can't get. That unit is not accessible to me. You're on the wait list for a voucher and they say, okay, maybe it'll be X number of days. Well, it ends up being Y number of days and you're checking and you're checking and you're checking. And so it's like one frustration after another. And that is what a really, really tight and under-equipped at this point housing market does to families who are low income. Another thing about those families experiencing homelessness now is that they are often working. So close to 40% of the families in our shelter are actually working full time. We have this stereotype of what it means to experience homelessness and what that says about you if you experience homelessness,
That's
right? And that stereotype could not be more wrong. I don't know if it's ever been right, but it's certainly wrong today.
I'd really like for you to dig a little bit deeper in that. And I think it's really important, especially after the last week and what has been said in the national news. There is certainly a perception of what a homeless person looks like, what their life might be like, what that whole actual universe is. And I think it's important to talk about how the range of people who experience homelessness. It is not just this.
Yep.
It is not just that.
Yep.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the range of people and what that experience might be for them and how they maybe got here?
Yes. When we think about homelessness, truly every kind of person could experience homelessness, right? That there is not one type of person. So in the family center, we serve anyone with dependent children.
Sure.
And that can be a dependent child of 17 or a dependent child of 7 days. We have babies born in the family center at the hospital, but two people living in the family center. And I'm going to tell you two stories. I think that helps to crystallize it a little better. So one of the common stories we hear is in the family center in particular, and this actually is across the board in homelessness, but it's a loss of or a fracture in the village that keeps us all together, right? So I think about myself, and if I were to confront the hardest of times, I have a village immediately around me that can hold me up, right? And I think about one woman in particular that I met who had entered the family center, and her story was that she moved to Columbus for an opportunity, right? So she has family elsewhere. She moved to Columbus for an opportunity and fleeing some of the bad things in the elsewhere, right? And when her job was eliminated, she didn't have anyone to catch her. She didn't have anything to fall back on. She had herself and her 4-year-old son. And you fight hard to keep it together, but often when the deck is stacked against you, what ultimately happens when you're not fortunate enough to have that village, that safety net of people, and policies behind you, you end up in homelessness, right? So this is a mom who was doing everything she could. Another example is we serve single adult women in this building that you and I are sitting in. And single adults are sort of treated differently in the system. They don't automatically get access to a shelter bed in Columbus the way that families do. So oftentimes, if you are experiencing homelessness as a single adult, your option is sleeping in your car, ultimately sleeping on the street, and it's very dangerous. And I will never forget the story from one woman in this building who her financial support passed away. She was on her own and ultimately fell into homelessness and only started using substances because she needed to find a way to stay awake all night because it was too dangerous to go to sleep. So when and that's one story, and there are thousands.
Sure.
When we make assumptions about why people end up in the hardest of circumstances, that's really when we have lost our humanity to see everyone for the human story that they represent.
I couldn't agree more. I think the other piece that people don't think about when we talk about homeless, you shared a story about the number of children who started their very first day of school here.
Yeah.
When we say things that are direct about homeless people in a negative way, they're children. Mm-hmm. And they are going through traumatic situations. I'm sure it isn't a stable situation when you're losing your home and you're coming into a shelter. But you talked about how your team really helped lift and prepare, and I'm hoping that you share that here too.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. So just this August of 2025, we had 40 children enter the family shelter. And August, to many people, I'm a parent, August means back to school. So in this time when kiddos starting in your new grade, right? It's such a big deal. We all remember those experiences in childhood. Okay, I'm ready for third grade, right? What's happening? How am I prepared? How am I going to show up as my best self? And in the Family Center, we had 40 children enter who were in that period of needing to get back to school. That is double the number of children we typically have entering. 40 children from 18 families entering in August. So it was a lot for our
Yes.
staff to handle, and they mobilized. We have, as I mentioned, wonderful partnerships in the community. So they mobilized to make sure kids had supplies, kids had backpacks, kids had haircuts, so that they really went back to school feeling their best self. That is so much a part of it.
Absolutely.
Right? When you think back on that first
Absolutely.
day of school, how do I feel like my best self? It is so hard to wake up and feel that way when you are waking up in shelter.
That's right.
And so our team got together to really mobilize and support those kids and support those families so they could have a great first day back to school and set them up for success for the entire year. I'm really, really grateful for the work that our team does every single day. And Betsy, at the same time, I wish they didn't have to do it.
Absolutely.
No child, no matter how well we serve them, wants to wake up on the first day of school in this period of unease and truly a crisis that their parents are experiencing.
As we shift away from the profile or the stories around who is being served here, can we talk about the funding? I know that there's a federal funding source that will not be any longer that helped keep 30,000 people in Central Ohio housed. 30,000, which is the equivalent of Dublin.
Yeah.
And we're talking about that funding source being gone. Can you share a little bit about what the status is and what we're going to do in the absence of that money and what that might look like in Columbus?
Yeah, so you're talking about emergency rental assistance and Impact, which is a local nonprofit, really was the bulk of the service of those dollars, right? So they were able to accept those dollars. They're federal through the American Rescue Plan that got funneled through the city to nonprofits that could actually help people stay housed. And in Columbus right now, a really important statistic is we have a general housing shortage, right? I mean, I think we all know this, right?
Absolutely.
Because housing is more expensive than it should be. It's taking up more of our monthly income than it should. And that means there's a shortage. There's a supply and demand problem. And that is affecting people, honestly, at every level of the income spectrum.
100%.
But when you look at very low income individuals, for every 100 very low income individuals in our community, there are 28 units available.
Say that again.
For every 100 very low income individuals in our community, there are 28 units available. So that means every single day, people are fighting to keep their housing, fighting to try to bring in more money, fighting to try to do more with less, fighting probably to hold on to, in some cases, an unsafe unit, right?
Absolutely.
To keep a house over their heads. And so those dollars were critically important because when the market is so strained at that level and families are experiencing, they're like one paycheck away from disaster, you do find that this infusion of dollars helped keep people housed. And when you're able to provide that money, that gives folks a cushion to then keep that unit for the long term. That is a classic homelessness prevention strategy.
Absolutely.
It's one of the things in this community that we need to invest more in. The best, least traumatic, the least expensive way to prevent homelessness is to be able to infuse those dollars on the front end, right? So it is going to be a hit to our community that those dollars have gone away. Impact did an incredible job with the program. And we don't yet know all the ways in which it's going to affect us. I know that the city has established a fund to try to help in some circumstances, but they will not be able to match the federal government dollars that came in. So we expect the market to get even tighter and even more challenging for those who are very low income, and to see sort of additional really clogs in the system that serves families experiencing homelessness.
I think it's a really important point to make. As many times as you and I have sat through housing conversations and housing different situations, we don't talk a lot about preservation, family preservation, home preservation, and how to make sure that we are keeping families in safe and stable housing so that they don't then end up in the system, which A, costs more money, B, is more traumatic for the population, for our region, for our city. I think that's a really important piece that I'm hoping we start to hear more about. What are we doing to help those who are housed currently before they end up in the system?
That's exactly right. That's where we need to start. And Community Shelter Board is, and with the support of the shelter providers, is embarking on a strategy to do that, right? So we need to have more dollars in prevention and diversion. Again, it is the hardest to get someone into housing once they have become homeless. So the more we can do to prevent that upstream, the better that the whole system will be able to function. And that will mean fewer families experiencing homelessness, and hopefully for shorter stays. That, the family shelter, the family center, when we were able to have that sort of 18-day, 24-day stay, we were able to move families back into housing stability to really cut down on the trauma experienced from homelessness, right? And that's what, if the system is working correctly, homelessness is brief and it's non-reoccurring. And that's what we need to get back to.
As you look forward, leading the YW in the landscape that we're in, what do you think the rest of this year, next year looks like? How is the YW pivoting? What might we see that's different?
Yeah. Well, speaking of funding, one of our greatest challenges right now is trying to shore up the funding that goes to emergency shelter. So as a system, we need to do more in prevention and diversion and rapid rehousing, and we need dedicated dollars to shelter. So the American Rescue Plan helped to stabilize a huge shortfall that had begun to grow in 2018, 2019 in shelters, where it was challenging to hold it together and keep doors open. This was before my time at YWCA. And then those dollars exited the community. And what that means is that shelters overall, so our shelter combined with 6 other providers in the community, we are experiencing close to $25 million in a funding shortfall on an annual basis because the federal government does not really invest meaningful money in an emergency shelter, and it's entirely on local communities to do that. So city and county. But city and county budgets, they're too strained to constantly push discretionary funding our way. That is how the system was designed 20 years ago when we opened our doors, but we've outgrown it, right? It's like we had a blazer that fit really well, and then I reach into my closet for that blazer from 20 years ago, and it does not fit. It does not look right. It looks dated. Maybe it doesn't even fit, but it also looks dated. It doesn't serve today's purposes. And that's really what our funding situation is like. So from this point, this year, really through next year, you are going to see a lot of advocacy from the YWCA about the need to solve for this funding crisis. Our pitch to the community is that we know how to solve for the public good. And we support our libraries, we support our parks, we support our arts through dedicated funding. Shelter is a basic human right.
That's right.
Food, water, and shelter, a basic human right. And it has no dedicated guaranteed funding. So we believe that it's imperative for this community to identify what dedicated funding would look like to support this critical piece of the housing continuum. Without shelter, the rest of it can fall apart far too easily. People are on the streets. People are sleeping in dangerous circumstances. Children, victims of domestic violence, truly lose their lives when we don't have this critical piece of the continuum of emergency shelter. So that, Betsy, is a huge focus that you're going to see from YWCA, from other shelter providers as well. And on October 8th, when our Activists and Agitators event is held, we're going to be talking a lot about this. We're celebrating 20 years of the Family Center, and we're saying 20 years later, we have to do things differently.
That's right. So now that we know what you're going to be working towards, share with us what we can be doing, the call to action. What can Central Ohio be doing to help, whether it's homelessness, whether it's the YWCA?
Thank you for that question. So first of all, if you're able to attend on October 8th, doors open at 5:30. We're at the Joseph Kanzani Center at CCAD. And would love to have people join us there because we're really going to dig in and tell this story, that this conversation you and I are having. We're going to hear it straight from residents and staff. We have a national speaker coming in, Ijeoma Oluo, who's going to talk about her journey with the housing system and housing instability herself. So we're really going to help give people some stories to tell and to feel. And then we're going to ask them to join us in our advocacy. So please come on October 8th if you can. And then if you cannot, go to our website and sign up for our list, because we are going to be arming our constituents, our stakeholders, with how to let your city council member know that you support stability of the shelter system and bigger housing solutions, right? Let your county commissioner know the same. There is a funding review advisory council, which is or advisory committee, which is like the most boring name, FRAC. And a funny name, people, fracking.
Yeah.
Right. But it stands for Funding Review Advisory Committee. They are convening currently, they're appointed by the city and the county to look at all the funding needs of our community, such as shelter, and to try to figure out what we can do better. They're going to issue a report sometime in the next 6 months. And it is going to take, I believe, the community coming behind that and saying, here's what we support in order to build the political will for policymakers to then sort of put into place some of these things that will be different for our community, right? We're going to have to think differently in Columbus, and we need real people raising their voices to say to our policymakers that they're here for it and they support it.
I'm excited to be following along and joining in October for your event, and also to be sharing the updates as you have them and ways that people can continue to follow along and make sure that their voices are echoing the needs and the support for the YWCA. Liz, we wrap every episode by asking, and I'm curious about yours specifically because you have worked, on the government side and now you're leading a nonprofit. We ask everyone, or I ask everyone, how would you define the Columbus way?
So I would define the Columbus way as that blazer I was talking about. I think we knitted it a couple decades ago. And I think that if we're going to be able to continue wearing it around the community, it needs an update. That the Columbus way needs to mean truly considering how everyone has access to prosperity in our community. It is not some business and political leaders who decide, the art of the possible. And I think that that's incredible that there was that commitment. But I think you really have to expand outside of those circles to look at what people around the community are asking for and what we know is getting in the way of community success. If incomes in this community continue to rise, on average, but we are sort of experiencing that prosperity on the backs of some people who can just never get ahead, that's not a community I want to leave to my 3 children. That's right. Right? So we have to update that jacket, update that blazer to be something that fits and looks right for today.
I love that response. That might be my favorite one so far.
Oh, amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time and sharing a more in-depth view. And I hope that more than anything from this episode, there's a humanization to what is happening in Central Ohio, but also across the country when it comes to homelessness.
Thank you, Betsy. It was awesome to be here.
Thank you so much.